I just really want to reiterate, especially because of this incident, my thanks to BRACU University, IUB, North South University and ULAB for staging this event. It's a real honor that you have done this for us. I would also like to extend my thanks to Professor Shaila Sultana for orchestrating everything. We're really grateful. And of course to Tanya Rahman for moderating and for keeping cool amidst what is quite a difficult thing to manage when you've got an event. I'll dig right into what we're going to do. I know we're running a bit late now. So my name is Chris Tang. I am the lead for the project I talk about today. The project is a collaboration between King's College London and the Swadhinata Trust, who do some very important community work in the UK. And we want to talk to you about the project in terms of what we've learned from the lived experiences and perspectives of people who are typically left out of the lens of research, people in the community who normally, because they're labeled hard to reach, are difficult to access for research purposes. As Tanya mentioned, there'll be 3 bits. Firstly, I'll give you a very quick background to the diaspora. Julie is much better placed to talk more about this later if you want to ask her questions. And then Julie's going to introduce the Swadhinata Trust and the important work. This project would not have happened without the Swadhinata Trust. They are a really important partner. And then I'll give you an overview of the project, what we did, why we did it, how we did it, and quite crucially, what we found out and how these findings led to the production of the film. We'll then have a chance to watch the film. We've got the animator, Diasporic here, and Julie and I will also be there to answer questions about what we have done. Okay, so without further ado, I will kick on. Right. So, so again, a very quick overview of the Bangladeshi diaspora in East London as it relates to the project. UK Bangladeshis are one of the most socially concentrated minority ethnic groups in the UK, with 48% of the entire UK Bangladeshi population living in the Greater London area, most located in East London, with 18% in just one borough in Tower Hamlets, where the study was located. And the consequence of this is that Bangladeshis represent the main ethnic group in the borough, 32% of what is quite a linguistically and culturally diverse part of London. It's also a very deprived part of London. Tower Hamlets was the 7th most deprived borough in the whole of the UK a few years ago. And I think, as most people are probably aware, the War of Independence saw the community grow exponentially, during which this politicization resulted in an ethno-national identity for this group. And I think this identity has been a source of strength for resistance to a lot of the obstacles they were facing at the time. There was a lot of structural racism, and violent racial violence as well that they had to face, and there were a lot of galvanizing points which Julie and Ansel will be able to speak a lot more to than I can, that resulted in a turnaround and a galvanization of the community, with a range of community organizations now focused on UK Bangladeshi community, and the picture is a little bit different today. What I've tried to represent here around with this little tapestry is some pictures from the DUS's storyboard for the animated film, just to give you an idea of how we're trying to represent this local borough and this community in terms of locations that are recognizable. At the top, you've got a representation of Brick Lane. It's a very famous street in London which has a lot of Bangladeshi restaurants. Underneath that, you've got East London Mosque. It's not exclusively, it's a mosque that has quite a diverse range of worshippers from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, but it's a very important landmark if you live in the area. If you go further down, we have a picture showing council housing, a typical social housing project which a lot of Bangladeshi families live in, including the family in the film. And then if we move to the right, to the left, we've got 2 pictures showing Whitechapel Market, which is, during non-pandemic times, a real bustling market, full of noise, full of smells, right outside Whitechapel Tube Station, very central. You can even see the city of London in the background in this photo. So it was a very important hub for the community as well. So without me going on too much, I'd like to hand over to Julie, who's going to tell you about the important work that the Swadhinata Trust have been doing in the borough. So Julie. Okay, I can see there's some issues unmuting Julie. I think we'll just be patient, give it a couple minutes. But I'll, in the meantime, just...
Hello, I'm online now. Okay,
Brilliant.
Well, and thank you everybody for attending this Zoom meeting. Yes, I concur with Chris. We've had a difficult start, but I'll get to the point. The Swadhinata Trust is based in Tower Hamlets, East London, UK. We started this project in 2000, and we've been working with various organizations and individuals since then. And Dr. Chris Tang is one of the long-standing partners that we've been working together. Previously, we've been looking at the impacts of health and well-being on older Bengali people in the borough. And this time around, we've been focusing on the COVID pandemic. And it's been really important for us to include the narratives and the stories of Bengali people in this pandemic and the experiences that we're facing, and include that in the national narrative, but also to, as Chris said, to include the voices and stories of people who are not normally included. And this is the older people in our community, the ones who would not normally have access to the kind of opportunities to interact with mainstream media, but also mainstream services. So it's a real delight for us to be included in this and be a partner of this really important piece of work. And it's very important for us to be able to share this work with our international partners in Bangladesh, so we can increase understanding and awareness of what's happening to the Bengali community in the UK with our partners in Bangladesh. So this project has been led by Kings with Chris in investigating it, and the Swadhinata Trust has been very important in recruiting the participants for interviews, but also engaging with people who would not normally be able to engage with this kind of research. And we did it at a time when it was particularly very difficult for people to stay connected. It was at the height of the pandemic. We couldn't meet each other. We couldn't see each other in person. We couldn't do many things, and our actions were restricted because of the contagion. And so we had to do these interviews over the phone with people. And so that was quite challenging, but we managed to speak to men and women over the age of 60 and their carers and family members to get an understanding of their experiences when they were facing COVID. So the work that we've done, we've been able to put together with this excellent animation that DIAWAS has been able to put together. And we hope that you are able to get an understanding of the kind of experiences that a particular family would have, a typical Bengali family might have in East London. So I'm going to hand back over to Chris to introduce the animation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Can I just check, can everybody, I've got a direct message from Mohammed, can everyone still see my screen, or do I need to reshare?
We can see.
You can see it. Okay. Yep. Okay. So I'll continue. I'm not sure why you couldn't see it, Mohammed. I'll continue. So I just want to give a little bit of background then to the study. For following on from what Julie has just said, the starting point for the study is a rather unfortunate news that emerged very early on in the pandemic, that minority ethnic groups were being adversely affected in the country. You can see this as very early data showing that Black, Asian, British, and other ethnic groups had a higher mortality rate than white British people. And Bangladeshis tend to be put in the Asian British category. And if we unpack then that, we can, we have this horrible statement that people of Bangladeshi ethnicity had around twice the risk of death when compared to people from white British ethnicity. And the reasons for this are complex. There's not one obvious reason, but a lot of it seems to relate to the fact that to the social structural inequalities created that exist for the community. A lot of people within the community live in urban areas, high density areas, such as where the study was located, where there is a higher risk of transmission. Also more likely to live in multi-generational households. So you have people more vulnerable to severe illness living alongside people who are also more likely to work in frontline jobs, working in stores, working as taxi drivers, who are more likely to bring the virus back home. And there are a host of other factors that we could also bring in. But the factor that the project focused on is health communication. We felt that this vulnerability was being compounded by the fact that most information about COVID is in English and in written form. So the communication was poor for this community. And the 2011 census was the first census in the UK that included language proficiency as one of its questions. So we have data that shows there's an interaction between age and ethnicity in terms of age and English language proficiency within the Bangladeshi group. So 70.6% of over 65-year-olds, for instance, reported being not proficient in English, but only 8.4% of 16 to 24-year-olds reported being not proficient. So we have a situation where we have some people in the community, usually younger people, who are better able to access advice directly because it's all being communicated in English, and some people who aren't able to access it directly. As I'm sure most people here are aware, a large proportion of UK Bangladeshis come from one region in Bangladesh, from Sylhet, and so Sylheti is an important language for the community. It's shared by a large proportion of UK Bangladeshis, and Sylheti, as you know, is very different from Bengali. It's a language that is primarily predominantly spoken. It's very rarely written. And this has certain consequences based on previous research that we've been involved in. It probably means that the people in Sylheti, you talk about risk in an oral language, which is you tend to talk about risk in a very different way than you would in a language that has evolved writing. There are different ways of conceptualizing things, and we're going to unpack that in a minute. The other thing that really comes out of this is there's likely to be a much stronger oral information ecology. So social networks are going to be really important for this community because some people can access the information and other people can't. So the only way some people can get information is by relying on people sharing that information with them. And we can see this dramatized really in what happened in terms of vaccine uptake in the community. So very early on in the pandemic, the UK Bangladeshis were labelled vaccine hesitant because they were taking up the vaccine slower. And I think this is a very poor label. It just really shows it takes a bit more time if you've got a written information system trying to communicate with a community that has an oral information ecology, and you're not really doing that effectively. It's going to take more time for those messages to get through. And that's really shown by the fact that now UK Bangladeshis are the most vaccinated ethnic group in London. That's a massive turnaround. So our study really wanted to get into this. We really wanted to understand how this community was sharing and engaging with information and learning about COVID as a community. We focused on community elders because these, firstly, because they are the most vulnerable to the effects of the virus. And secondly, because they were more likely to have access issues based on English and their cultural background. Sorry, based on the English language issues, and potentially also because a lot of the information was in writing and they're used to speaking an oral language. We also asked them to nominate somebody within their social network that they relied on for information and advice. So these social contacts, not everybody had somebody like that. A lot of the elders we talked to, it's quite a heterogeneous group, were very fluent in English and had no problem and actually accessed information quite independently and shared that with other people. So we had 16 interviews with these younger social contacts, and these interviews were in English, but the interviews with the elders were in Sylheti. And the sort of research questions we're exploring are what beliefs they had about COVID, what practices they had, and how this differed between the two groups, or whether it differed between the two groups, how these people have been accessing and interpreting messaging. Very important was what the role was for language in communicating the risks of COVID. So how, for instance, was risk COVID talked about in Sylheti compared to English, and how, and ultimately what we wanted to know is what's the potential for boosting social learning, this oral information ecology, and that's really where we wanted to go with the project. So the analyses we did, well, first of all, was we did a thematic analysis looking at what people were saying, and then we did another analysis, a linguistic analysis, that looked at how they were saying it as well. So, and as you can see from this timeline, the interviews were conducted in late 2020. So this is just in between the first and second wave of the pandemic in the UK. And so by the time we'd analyzed the data, we wanted to check that we'd interpret it correctly. And then obviously the pandemic had moved on as well. We wanted to check if what they still thought was still true. So we extracted a narrative from the data that explained the data in the form of a typical person's experience of the pandemic within the community. And we presented that narrative to older participants in a series of focus groups in April. And we asked them then at different points in the story to tell us if the story was correct, if they wanted to add anything or change the story in any way. And in this way, we validated our interpretations. And this narrative, this validated narrative, then served as the basis for the animated film that we're going to watch, A Corona Story. Okay, so just to acknowledge the project team, on my own, got Mark Cabling, who was the lead researcher here on pictured, Gabriella Rundblad is a professor of language and cognition, and therefore has really important insights that help guide our analyses. Hilary Jones really was vital in project management and making sure the project ran smoothly. And of course, we have Swadhinata Trust, who, as Julia said, really led on the data collection and informed all phases of the project. Really, they've been vital to us. We also, I should also take my hat off. I know some of them are here to the Sylheti consultants in the project. They were absolutely vital in not just translating the data, but informing on the linguistic analysis and our understanding of Sylheti. Diwas is here, the animator of the project, the voice actress who performed the role of Shaila in the film Saima Ahmed in the Bengali version. We're going to hear us shortly. She was absolutely fantastic. And we wanted to make sure that the film was medically feasible. So we worked with a medical consultant, Dr. Farhana Rahman. Okay, so I know we're short on time, so I'm going to go very quickly over the findings. There's not too much here, and then I'm going to lead straight into the film so we can get around to watching it finally. So just an overview of the project really gives you an impression. The first, I suppose, overview of our findings on a macro level. We get this overview of how the oral informational ecology works during the pandemic. So social context and some older men cast themselves as information seekers and sharers. So they really talked about information as if it was, as you do in English, as a commodity. It's something that you access, an object that you get, you gather, you then break it up and share. And this is very, very different picture from what we got from the interviews with older women and some older men. They reported not being able to access information directly because it was in English or because it was in writing. Even some stuff was being shown on the local Sylheti TV channel, but some also reported switching off from that because it was too depressing. And they did not talk about information as a commodity. They talk about advice and information as something that was spoken and heard. And it always came in the same direction. So as one participant put it, my daughter, she speaks and I listen. So you can see from this that there's a real vulnerability to misinformation based on this, because we have an oral information ecology where there's not enough people talking about the advice in the community. So you have a situation where some people are reliant on a single person for advice. And that means if the person that they are reliant on gets the wrong end of the stick, they're also likely to get the wrong end of the stick. If we dig into the data a little bit deeper and we look at how the language people were using, we really notice a big difference between the language of messaging and advice and information about COVID and the way older participants expressed their understanding of COVID in Sylheti. So for instance, we have a message it's very common in messaging to talk about number of cases, number of deaths, the R number, and so on, as a way of determining whether it's safe or not, or safer or not to go outside and to mix and to lift restrictions. And in English, when you talk about these types of things, and in a lot of written languages, really, you often use language like up and down, don't we? We say cases are rising, deaths are falling, tests are high right now. And this language was reflected in English, the language of the information sharers. They often talked about, okay, it's safer to go out now because COVID is down. But when it goes up, that's when I'm going to be a bit more careful. So, but this sort of language is completely absent from older participants. Instead, they really talked about risk as an embodied experience. They talked about, some of the older women in our study talked about having all heavy limbs. They talked about the connection between physical frailty and risk. So for instance, some of the older men said that they felt resilient to the virus because they were very fit and had very active lifestyles. So it's a very different way of looking at risk. It's much more related to embodied experience. And this is similar for transmission vectors. Everybody in the study seemed to understand and conceptualize the virus as a traveler. So the virus comes and then it goes and so on. And they also understood the body as a container for the virus. So the virus enters the body and then you have it, it's in your body. But when we look at the Sylheti data, the way it gets into your body is much more visceral, much more based in a situation, in a real world situation. So for instance, some participants talked about people who have COVID producing breath, and that breath became an object that if you touched would give you the disease. And what this tells us really is that the people who are sharing information in the community aren't just translating, they're having to perform what we've been referring to as a type of linguistic and cultural mediation, which involves completely reframing the messaging in a way that makes it accessible and relatable and resonant for older participants. And that means that if you've got a very abstract message, so something like social bubble or support bubble, it doesn't translate or reframe very, very easily. So social bubble and support bubble in the UK is a message that was that related to when lockdown was in force, you were able to mix with one other household freely. And that didn't really seem to communicate across for very reasons. First of all, it's a very abstract idea, the idea of a social bubble, and it doesn't go across well in a language where people prefer embodied and visceral expressions of risk. And also because the word household is involves a different conceptualization, doesn't it? And it doesn't. There's no word for household in Sylheti that relates space and people in the same way. So we do have a conceptualization of social and support bubble, but it's of the household as a safe container, and the interpretation of household is not space, but of the people that occupy it. And if you have an expanded version, conceptualization of household, that means lots of people occupy the space, and thinking of it as safe is potentially dangerous because you have people bringing the virus back. The way that the Sylheti data was quite different from the English data is it relates to the use of stories. Stories were really important to how our participants talked about their experience of COVID in Sylheti. And I'll give you an example here. So as I said, everybody understood COVID as a traveler, as a conceptualization. Also have amongst older participants, they took this conceptualization a bit further and made it again quite situation-based and visceral. They talked about COVID acting with agency, almost as if it had its own animacy. It goes out there, it looks for your weak spot and then attacks you. And that doesn't sound like a virus, that sounds much more like a predator. So we have this visceral conceptualization. But what's interesting is that they connected these different conceptualizations of COVID in the form of a story. So they told the story of COVID was really the story of a traveling predator. It came from China, it went to other places, and it came here, found people, attacked them, and then it went away again, but will come back. And the timing of its arrival relates to lockdown, doesn't it? Predator arrives, people go into lockdown and hide, so it goes away, and then it comes back. It's a very different way of talking about risk, isn't it? So really what we wanted to do, because stories were so important for our participants, they weren't just important because they connected their ideas about COVID, but because they were ways of sharing information. For instance, one of our older participants talked about a story about a neighbor he had back in Bangladesh who developed COVID symptoms and unfortunately then gone to hospital and passed away. And part of that story was the fact that he was 10 years younger than the participant. And this story gives us a lot of information about vulnerability, doesn't it? It's not using the terms high risk or vulnerable, but it's saying that you're potentially vulnerable if you are, even if you're a bit younger, you still might be vulnerable to the effects of COVID. And stories are important ways of sharing information in an oral cultural ecology. So if you get the right types of stories, they can really promote an understanding of COVID risk. Stories don't need to be written down in order to be remembered. And that's the key point of a story in an oral information ecology. So what we wanted to do with the film was really tell the story of one family's experience of the epidemic and use this story to represent the story of the community. And so we have the story of one family's experience of COVID, a multi-generational household, and within the film we also tried to embed some messages that really engage with any conceptualizations that might be potentially harmful. So for instance, as we said, this idea of the household as a safe container is potentially risky if you connect it to the idea that you don't get sick from your close relations. And actually that's the biggest risk, isn't it? Somebody going out into the world and bringing it back home. So we portrayed this in the film, as you're going to see very shortly, in a scene where there's a knock at the door of the family home. The granddaughter goes to answer the door, and then the knocking turns into a COVID battering ram trying to break into the house. And when the granddaughter opens the door, it's her auntie and uncle coming around to visit. So so this is the sort of thing we try to do within the film. We also wanted to draw upon cultural scenes that seem to be very important to our data. So the key driver of whether people followed or didn't follow rules in our data was social relationships. People wanted to follow the rules because they thought that following the rules would protect their community. And that was absolutely vital for them. At the same time, people were very afraid of being perceived as a stickler for the rules, and these two, this tension between perceived as the rule stickler and a rule and condemning rule breakers as committing violence against the community was dramatized very often in visits, because we have a close-knit community. People often come around to visit, and during lockdown, this creates a point of social cultural tension. And we really wanted to bring that into the film. So we have, as a centerpiece of the film, a scene where, just following the knock at the door, the auntie and uncle come round to visit. And then we have a situation where the granddaughter comes out and says, no, it's not safe, you can't come in. But then the mother comes out and says, no, she's just been a stickler, please come in. And then we have the grandmother living with them coming out saying, oh, is so happy to see company at last. So this creates a very complex but socially culturally resonant scene where the granddaughter tries to minimize the risk to everybody by, for instance, sitting the auntie and uncle who are visiting next to the windows, and the COVID mists can go out of their mouths and out the window. So the final thing that we wanted to get through in the film is this notion of mediation. Based on our data, we have a lot of data that tells us of how trust was negotiated in the community. People tended to trust people who are more local to the community. Obviously, the most local people, the relatives of the people sharing information, are the people who are the most trusted. But there was also a high value placed on expert knowledge, on health knowledge. So we have this sort of intersecting access at trust, whereby the most trusted people are likely to be somebody you know, somebody from within your community who has some sort of medical expertise, like a doctor or a pharmacist or a nurse. And these people were absolutely vital in being mediators, in taking messages and information in English and reframing it in Sylheti so it was relevant, accessible, relevant, relatable, and resonant for the people they were communicating with. And in the film, the lead character is Shaila, who acts as a mediator in various situations for a family. There are also other people acting as mediators in the family. At the end, even the older, the grandmother acts as a mediator in some senses. So it's about trying to encourage mediation as a really important activity for information sharing, to boost the oral informational ecology in a way that addresses the inequalities created by the use of English and writing as a predominant way of storing and sharing information about COVID. So I have talked for way too long, probably. So hopefully you're still with me. We're now going to turn to the film, and you can see all of these, hopefully you can see all of these points dramatized and conceptualized in the film. We're going to show the Bengali version. We have an English and Sylheti version as well. The Bengali version, the reason why we have a Bengali version is that we wanted to reach a wider range of people. Not everybody speaks Sylheti in the community, but we were guided by the project in terms of the way we use Bengali in the video, so that the conceptualizations that underlie the language that we're using are accessible for a wider audience as well.
করোনা ভাইরাস যখন আমাদের চারপাশে আসে, আমরা তার গন্ধ পাইনি, তাকে দেখতেও পাইনি। এটা আমার পরিবারের গল্প। আপনারা এটিকে আপনার গল্প হিসেবেও ভাবতে পারেন। এই যে আমি যথারীতি দেরি করে কাজ করছি। বরিস খালি চীন থেকে আসা ভাইরাসের কথা বলেই যাচ্ছিল। প্রথমে কেউ তাকে গুরুত্ব দেয়নি, কিন্তু তারপর এই ছিল আমাদের সমাজ। আর তারপর জীবন থমকে যায়। আমার দাদির ডায়াবেটিস আছে, তাই তাকে আলাদা করে দিতে হয়েছিল। আমাদের বাড়ির 5 জন সদস্য যখন একসাথে থাকে, তখন তাকে কেন আলাদা থাকতে হবে এটা বোঝানো ভীষণ কঠিন ছিল।
আমরা হরে হরে টাকমুকে লান, আমরা যেহেতু একলগে থাকি, আমি এখন আর দেখতে পারতাম না।
আমরা যতই অস্বীকার করার চেষ্টা করেছি, করোনা ভাইরাস আমাদের সবাইকে ততই প্রভাবিত করেছে। আমাদের পরিবার, আমাদের ব্যবসা, আমাদের সম্প্রদায়কে। আমি শুধু আমার পরিবারকে সাহায্য করতে আর তাদের নিরাপদে রাখতে চেয়েছিলাম। ও খালা আবার এটা কি পাঠালো? 2 টুকরো লেবু নাকে ঢুকালে ভাইরাস মরে যাবে? কি? আমি বুঝতে পারছি না কেন যে সে এসব ভুয়া পরামর্শ শুনছে, যখন পরিষ্কার ইংরেজিতে সব পরামর্শ দেয়া আছে। অনেকেই এটা বুঝতে পারছে না, আর আমরা এতটাই বিপদে পড়েছিলাম। Have you just come from the supermarket? You'd better change first. Think about Dadi.
Sure.
আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
সরি খালা, সরি খালু, আপনারা পিতরে আইতা পারতা নাই, এখন তো লকডাউন। আমি বিধিনিষেধ মানতে চেয়েছিলাম, কিন্তু আমার মায়ের অন্য ধারণা ছিল। তারা একজন আরেকজনের সঙ্গ পেয়ে এত খুশি হলেন যে তারা করোনার কথা পুরোপুরি ভুলে গেলেন। আমি ভুলিনি, আমি পারিনি। দাদু, তোমার ইনসুলিন দেওয়ার টাইম নাইনি এখন? খালা খালু, সরি আসি, আসলে ইলার সময় বেশিক্ষণ বোয়া ঠিক নাই, যা কাজ করে, তাই না? যখন ভ্যাকসিন বের হলো, এই ব্যাপারে আমার বাবার সন্দেহ ছিল। তার রেস্টুরেন্টের একজন ওয়েটার তাকে বলেছিল যে এটা নাকি মৃত শিশুদের থেকে তৈরি করা হয়েছে, কিন্তু আমার ভাই আর দাদি ভালোই জানতেন যে এটা সত্যি না।
Kamal shouldn't believe everything he reads on the internet.
এটা বলতাম মার, তোমার জন্মের আগে আমি যেতাম দিয়ে এইটাম
চাইলে হয়েছে ইগু হইল সেফ ও তাই একজন ফার্মাসিস্ট।
করোনার সময় আমরা কিভাবে নিরাপদ থাকার চেষ্টা করেছি এই সম্পর্কে এটি ছিল আমার পরিবারের গল্প। এই অভিশপ্ত ভাইরাস, এই গজব, যেমনটা আমার দাদি বলে থাকেন, আমাদের দেহে এবং আমাদের বাড়িতে ঢুকতে চায়। এটি বিস্তারের জন্য সেই মানুষদের সাহায্য চায় যাদের আমরা সবচেয়ে বেশি ভালোবাসি। ভ্যাকসিন তো বের হয়ে গেছে, কিন্তু করোনা ভাইরাস রয়ে গেছে, সব মিথ্যা গল্পও রয়ে গেছে। আমি যদি উপদেশটি না পড়তাম তাহলে কি হতো? আমি যদি কিছু না বলতাম? আমাদের নিজেদের ভাইরাস সম্পর্কে অবহিত থাকা উচিত। আমাদের পরিবারকে বলুন, আমাদের বন্ধুদের বলুন, এরপর কি হবে নির্ভর করছে আমাদের উপর।
Right, Chris, that was a wonderful animation in Bangla, really thought-provoking. So we do have some questions for the project. So starting with you, what do you see as the main outcomes of the project? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. And I'll try and keep this brief. I'd really want to bring in other voices from the project as quickly as possible. You're probably tired of hearing me. Just very quickly, I think what we've really learned is the role of oral language as a factor for health communication. We know what is involved in creating an oral information ecology that is effective, and why, for instance, we have this turnaround through social networks in terms of the vaccine uptake within the community. So I think that's really important. We know about how we need to frame language information so that it makes it easier to mediate. And so we know about the differences between written messaging advice and what's needed to create messages that are they're easier to carry across into Sylheti. We also know about how mediation works. We know that we know who's trusted the most. We know who makes good mediators. And we also know that if we just leave these ethnic minority groups alone and don't do any sort of form of cultural adaptation, there's going to be a delay and there's going to be misinterpretations because you've got a written system working with an oral system. So I really think there needs to be work done, as there has been done, to boost grassroots mediation within the community so that we really create this oral information ecology, so people at the end of the information flow can then check with more than one person about whether what they're hearing and the information they're getting makes sense and is trustworthy. And I think the last thing I want to mention is the film. I think the film is a really important output of the project. We've managed to have it shown on TV over here, so hopefully we've reached a wider audience. We're trying with the English and Sylheti version, we're trying to engage a younger audience. I'm going to try and do some work around that soon. But yeah, those are the outcomes of the project, I would say.
Thank you, Chris. So my next question to you is, what is the legacy of the project in terms of communication about COVID?
Again, I'll try and keep this short. So I think just to take the point forward about mediation, I think mediation is a potential way of addressing communication inequalities if we promote strategies that promote more mediation by different mediators and more effective mediation. I think this sort of thing needs to be put into emergency planning. And in going forward in terms of communicating about the pandemic, but also about other health threats. And it's something that really is specific to the situation of a lot of minority ethnic groups in the UK that speak an oral or share to some degree an oral language, and where there's a fertile oral cultural ecology that can be tapped into with messaging and needs to be tapped into with messaging. And I think research really what we do need to do with research is really sort of, we focused on Sylheti, but we need to draw comparisons with other oral languages and develop common strategies that promote cross-linguistic and cross-cultural communication through mediation.
Right, thank you, Chris. That was really wonderful. So I'll move from Chris to Divas Bish, the animator of the film. Divas, I hope you are here. Can you unmute yourself, Divas?
Might need to unmute him.
Yusuf, can you please unmute Divas?
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, Divas, thank you. So my question to you is, what was your artistic vision for the film?
I think in my communication with Chris and the others, I think what we wanted to do, or perhaps what my task was to maintain the cultural authenticity of the film, or of the story that we were telling. So we wanted it really to sort of come across. Yeah, now you can see me. Yeah. So yeah, we really wanted for it to come across that it is really a story of a Bangladeshi family from East London, and so we did have focus groups with different members of the community, showed them the character designs, whether the characters were looking the right way, and well, they look like people that they could recognize, and even the backgrounds that we used. So we used real world backgrounds that reflected sort of the physical space of East London. So my task was to maintain that kind of sort of cultural authenticity, but also to have a certain sort of artistic appeal so that the story is told in an engaging manner. So I think that was what the vision was for the film. I hope it came across, but I know online sort of platforms, it becomes at times pixelated or it lags a bit. So perhaps you can, if you want to, you can rewatch the film on YouTube. Again, we can share both the links in Sylheti and in Bengali.
Yeah, it was it's really wonderful. The animation is really effective. I think it has some impact on the audiences. So wonderful job, I must say.
Thank you.
Right. So I have another question for you. How is the project similar or different from other projects you have worked on?
I would say while obviously this this film documents the pandemic experience, I did do an animation film, an animation documentary on the experience of the Bangladeshi community as part of my own research, which is called Al-Tabali and the Battle of Brick Lane. So it documents the period around the racist killing of Al-Tabali back in the 1970s, when there was widespread racist violence, and how the Bangladeshi community sort of mobilized into action against fighting against the racist forces. That film is also available online on the Tower Hamlets Council's YouTube page. And perhaps if you're interested in sort of examining the experiences of the Bangladeshi diaspora, very critical memories of the community, perhaps you can give it a watch. I can also share that link. So I would say, yeah, it is sort of an ongoing sort of association of mine with the community, and with sort of trying to tell communities, community-based storytelling around the Bangladeshi diaspora. Yeah, that has been sort of showcased in the film before, and even in this film.
That's wonderful, and congratulations, Divas. It's really wonderful what you're doing. Really wonderful. So I'll move to Ms. Rajahan Begum is not here with us today, so I'll move to Julie Begum. Is Julie Begum here?
Yes, I'm here. Hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I hope you're well.
Thank you. Yes.
Right. So, Ms. Begum, my question to you is, what relationships does the Trust have with the universities and academic projects?
Okay, so we've been working with various universities and academic community since our inception in documenting, researching, and collecting the contributions of British Bangladeshis to the UK society.
Right. And then my next question for you is, from your work in the community, what sort of contributions have the diaspora made, has the diaspora made to the economy, culture, and history of the UK?
Well, to the economy, we've contributed billions in terms of the kind of economic activity. For example, the Bangladeshi led and owned restaurants have to the UK economy. Culturally, we've added to the cultural capital of Britain as a multicultural society and country. We've, and in terms of socially, we have added a diversity that wasn't there before. And I think this isn't just a recent phenomenon. This has been a part of our experience since the migration of Bengalis before Bangladesh and also before partition in India. So there's been hundreds of years of a relationship between Britain and Bengal that we've been trying to raise understanding, awareness of in the UK, but also the wider community, to make sure that people know that this isn't just a contemporary relationship, that it's based on a historical trade, empire, and other colonial experiences. And it needs to be understood as a British experience as much as a Bangladeshi experience.
So how do you think these contributions can be preserved and recognized?
Well, it needs to be a part of the UK education system, so that our stories and narratives are a part of the British history, and also that people are recognizing the contribution of Bengalis and Bangladeshis in particular to the British society. And so that needs to be a part of the kind of awareness that we are trying to bring to the rest of the society. So we do that through the activities and events and programs that we run, the projects that we work on with academics and universities, but also other organizations that are based in the arts and culture and heritage sector in the UK. So we're working on various projects as volunteers in our spare time. I have to say. We are a very small charity that's based in Tower Hamlets and London, but we managed to do, we punch above our weight in terms of the kind of work that we're able to do and the kind of partnerships that we're able to work with, despite our sort of lack of capacity in this area.
Thank you, Ms. Begum. And I must say that what you are doing, it's really noteworthy, remarkable. We can't just say enough to, thank you for contributing on behalf of the Bangladeshis over there. So thank you.
Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome.
And it's a real pleasure to be a part of this program today. So thank you for making sure that this has been such a success.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. So now we would like to take questions from our audiences. If there are questions from our audiences, you could raise your hand, or you can type in the chat box, whatever you feel easy for you. We can take your questions now. Does anybody have any questions for our speakers, our participants?
So, hi, Chris. Can I just have a quick question? Brilliant job. So, congratulations on that. But I was just wondering, the data that you showed at the very beginning, that the amount of casualty among the Bangladeshi British, so is higher than the, mainstream. And I was just wondering, the misinformation and the casual, attitude towards COVID-19. Is there any correlation between this misinformation and the number of deaths? Or, there is something more to it? Because we really did not touch on the political aspect of it, because it was more about the, misinformation that is out there. So I'm just wondering, how do you mediate that kind of dilemma out there?
Thank you, Shamshad. It's a good question. The reasons for why there's a greater vulnerability for minority ethnic groups is really a matter for epidemiology, and based on those explanations, we can say that there's lots of different reasons why it's the case. So there are reasons such as, for instance, living in a high density population, being more likely and more vulnerable and exposed to the risks of COVID. And you can relate those explanations to socio-structural inequalities. There's also a greater, a lot of people from minority groups often have a higher level of comorbidities associated with COVID, things like diabetes, and that also puts them more at risk as well. And again, that's not really an epidemiological factor, it's really a social factor, because there's an intersection there between socioeconomic inequalities and health outcomes. With the study, I think you're absolutely right. You can't actually set claim, well, communication caused all of this. It certainly didn't. It's not about poor communication, but we can certainly, there's certainly evidence to point to an inequality in how information is being communicated, and we really saw that with the vaccine uptake. Vaccine uptake was slow because we had a written system going out there trying to communicate messages in a way that wasn't really accessible or resonant, and needed to be mediated. And then the group was labeled as being bad, as having a poor vaccine uptake. And it was only when mediation started working and happening in the community that people then started taking up the vaccine. And now they're the most vaccinated group, but there's no media coverage of that. So there's a bit of a problem around how I think the group is positioned, the community is positioned in the media as always doing something wrong. I think there's a problem around this expectancy that they're going to get information in the same way if you just communicated all English and writing. And I think there's an issue around not setting up mediation and oral informational ways of communication from the get-go, and doing it all as a sort of like last minute, oh, it didn't work, let's try this. So I think that's where we're really coming with the project. So it's that side of things. So I think if you've got increased vulnerability and poor communication, that's really not good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think, thank you, Chris, and Shamshad sir, thank you so much. I think Shaila madam has one question for Chris.
Chris, this question is for our young researchers and academics in Bangladesh. Can you tell us the benefits of involving communities and non-profit organizations in our research?
That's a really good question, Shaila. I think I would say if you're doing a community-focused project, and all my research has been community-focused, really. You have to involve the community, and you have to involve the organizations within that community that represent it and know it as a starting point. You can't not involve them. So it's not just a benefit, it's an essential part of that research. And I think I certainly have learned probably a lot more from working with Julie and Anta than they have from working with me, because they provided so much insight into the data, how the data should be collected, how the project should be run, and yeah, I don't think I'd even I can't really I can't overstate enough, I don't think, how important it is to involve these organizations and the sort of insights and cooperation you do. I think any output like this film has to be co-constructed. It's okay if you're academic and you've got certain insights into, okay, this methodology or whatever, but that's not really that useful until you start combining it with the insights of the people who are working and living within the communities you want to investigate and work with as well. So yeah, absolutely vital, I would say, not just beneficial.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Chris, you wanted to say something?
There was a question from Sabrina. I mean, I see Julie's answered it. How did we come together? Yeah, we've been working together for a while. It was all very, I mean, Diwas I had seen and was aware of Diwas's work because I'd been following the project that he was working on with Altab Ali at the time, and a time we put in the bid, and so I contacted him about in connection with that. So I knew he'd already done animation for the community, and we're so lucky to have the US join us. He's so talented, and yeah, Julie and Ansar, who I see now is here, a voluntary director of the trust, who's also here, who's doing his he's just done some incredible stuff as well. His own research and writings on about the history of the community are really, really important. We've been working together for a while. We've known each other for quite some time now, so I think yeah, it all sort of came together very quickly, but it's based on history between us.
Right. Thank you, Chris, for all the insightful answers. I think we can go for the vote of thanks now. So I would request Shaila madam to kindly say the vote of thanks. Shaila madam, over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you. What a meaningful research project indeed. Congratulations, the researchers from the King's College London, Swadhinata Trust, and members from the Bangladeshi British community for conducting such a worthwhile research. I came to know about the research from Dr. Chris Tang last year, and right away I requested him to let me know when he would be done with the research so that we may present the research findings and outcome of the research to Bangladeshi researchers, academics, and our young colleagues and students who are looking for ideas and topics for meaningful research studies. On many occasions, it happens that we conduct research years after years, and yet we sometimes struggle to bring about positive changes to the communities on the basis of our research findings. Today, Chris and his team have shown us that we may create films, reach the communities, and share the findings with the community members and bring about positive changes. We have also seen that We may strengthen our research projects by collaborating with other researchers from other disciplines, non-profit organizations, and community members. So on behalf of the entire Bangladeshi applied linguistics communities and health researchers, I would like to thank the research team for joining us today and sharing their experiences and officially launching the film for us in Bangladesh. I would personally like to thank the honorable VCs and pro-VCs of BRACU University, Independent University Bangladesh, North-South University, and University of Liberal Arts. I would also like to mention Professor Shamshad Muttoja, Pro-VC, ULAB, University of Liberal Arts. He has been here with us from the very beginning and has been a great support. I would also like to thank the chairpersons, Professor Firdaus Hazim of English and Humanities, BRAC, Dr. Naureen Rehnuma, Department of English Modern Languages, Independent University Bangladesh, and then Dr. AQMA Rahman Bhuiya, Department of English and Modern Languages, North-South University, and Ms. Arifa Ghani Rahman, Department of English and Humanities, University of Liberal Arts, for coming forward to support the event and launching of the film. The event is theirs, to be precise, and no doubt. I would also like to thank the IT department of the University of Liberal Arts Bangladesh for today's support, specifically Arif Billah Al Mamun, Mr. Yusuf Ali, and Mr. Noore Alam. At the end, I would like to thank Tania Rahman of North-South University for the beautiful poster that she has made herself, and for the moderating of the event and taking the major responsibility of organizing it on behalf of all of us. Thank you so much. I think there is a question from Mahbooba Madam. Can you take the question, Tanya?
Okay.
Yeah. You're glad that she is here with us? I've just seen her raising the hand.
Dr. Nasri, is it?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you very much, Shaila Sultana, Chris, and everyone, Tania, and all. I just joined late, but I have seen in the meantime the video that you shared, and I think that that's the one we have been looking for. And because you know that we are working in the similar kind of project with University College London, UCRI funded, Gender Responsive Resilience in Policy and Practices, and I'm leading in the South Asian region. And we are also requested to make some documentary we are doing in Bangladesh context, because we have funded 7 projects. But I think we haven't done enough with this kind of animation film that you presented here as a coroner story. And there are many stories of the 7 projects that we are awarding in Bangladesh and India, Sri Lanka, Nepal. So because it's already the Thanksgiving ceremony, so it would be nice to be linked. And I think Professor Shaila Sultana will be communicating more with us about it. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone and organizers for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for being here. It means a lot to us.
Yes, I hope we can connect afterwards. Shaila, that would be wonderful. Can I just respond to your thanks, Shaila?
Yes, please.
Can I just say my fullest thanks and respect to how well and how disciplined you were in organizing this and responding to the adversity at the start. You did such an amazing job keeping it all together and making sure that we had the event. Well done. That is absolutely fantastic. I'm so proud to be here, and so honored that 4 universities have collaborated to give us this platform. So thanks ever so much to everyone here. I also should just give a quick nod. Marie, I see, is here. She's one of the Seletti consultants on the project. Ansar, who's made himself visible. I hope your computer has solved its issue. Ansar and Julie work together at the Swadhinata Trust. You're welcome here as well. And great that you could join us. So thanks to everyone involved, and thank you so much for supporting us.